Sultim de revedang bo.
Chikim katsan rotsi saro bo.
Rotsare.
Sare.
Che romi do som.
Jam den de jam be yong ma cha za bo kang ge lo de dim nyen den nye dra nam da rab sare ve chi nye den gen je yen ze nye je tu gra le bom ze kong da se be zun re ma re men dam du nge che ze ve gon la bu je dar ze yen la ju ju yong den song Rudra che do nyama nye long le je ja do ro ze chen Bakri busre dung re nye chen ze ra chen tam dene da sa ju tar sen yen den lu zo ja se tu ku chun tra chu dan chu nye jen de da le mes jan pe yong la Sedenin çece çenra özrece dalı demomen barasrane kadan tence jonlu dokbaye loje pobe no azardo so kongidu je özrece dawa tamje nam bomba tenjen de yongdan bakon Kodam de la da sa Njamya shana do je jen re ze sa yin yin bo driba nam brasa nam gen yin bo shamba kundu zon nye ve se jen je lang go sha tsala che je kala jen rab jen kura je ze be ve dong dur je len la po ger ve den ba kun san ze be ga ju rum bo che la sha je wo Chödrak chö Jänner lo ma no chen ne chen be ye she je roso yi la kun ge pa der wa rig be do je sha lang go sa cha la so che number so kun jo sam la chap sun ro ve lo dang song jup du sem je be lo number 2 sal tam ne tam be chö sen ro nang
Please start out to bring clearly to mind the objects of refuge and to take refuge in them, the 3 jewels, as well as to generate the Bodhi mind.
Tene tambe chu sin ne tene simba samdu ma jawa che chu te rang simpyun de tabyin sam sem de la zotak to be che to che number san tong ro nang.
And please also give thought to the following, namely that teachings of the Buddha Dharma are not meant to just be heard or listened to. The point of those teachings is that those who listen take these teachings to heart, make use of them to the effect of there being a shift from a worldly mindset to a more enlightened mindset.
Tine penang ran so ge jikten di na le yinanda chewa jema le yinanda lek pe yun tin sama yang sem gi shele ji zor chene yung ge yor la nye pe dungal la so pa nye pa sama te yang sem gi shele ji la zor chene yung ge yor sem de zor dab che.
So one should also consider the fact that whatever one's circumstances in this life and in future lives, whatever the conditions one has, good or bad, originate with the workings of one's own mindset. The circumstances are in fact the results of the workings of one's own mindset. whether good or bad, whether circumstances of well-being or circumstances of suffering, all those circumstances originate with specific workings of one's mindset.
rangi semde rangi durtapchil zön gore mado jinda pinto kangeyang semde yuwa tang tuk mare.
So in terms of obtaining states of well-being, one needs to tame the worldly mindset so that there is a shift, there is change, where the worldly mindset progressively becomes more and more enlightened as to or on the path to enlightenment, rather. And whether that happens or not, this shift, whether that shift happens or not in a progressive manner, depends upon the individual's own efforts. So it's up to the individual himself to work with his mindset in order to get to a progressive change in terms of the worldly mindset improving, becoming more constructive, and finally more and more enlightened, depending upon the various levels that are attained in terms of the individual's progress.
Tiyinte penangaranza namba sanjeba le chatsuna jamdende ke chusungse tatanga jamne chujipung bo jeti yitong songre dene som songre ramen songso yore tepar sumse ya tepar ba guse ya shegre yina tet same ninden rabote nge semde la zolta jike semde len jurwaji tangtap khonagi chedu songre.
Now the teachings set forth by the Buddha, the Bhagavan, are many. There are various classifications in terms of the teachings the Buddha gave. There is a classification of 84,000 types of teaching, another into three primary categories called the three baskets. There is yet another categorization named the three paths, and yet another one named the 9 paths, and so on. Now, the essential point of all those categorizations is that the aim of any of these categorizations is to enable practitioners to work with the worldly mindset and make a change for the better. That is to say, to engage in a path where the individual progressively develops a more and more enlightened mindset, otherworldly mindset.
Tagana shinge number sanjebe yonglu tsu nangtu lom nga sa ju se tendeg nam ya mongbo chi yod. Tenso kanga yang sawa semte yaun roya ta ya yen roya tenne yewa de she yod.
There are yet other categorizations in terms of the great Buddhist treatises and their basis, the sutras which record the teachings of Buddha Shakyamuni himself. There are categorizations into the 5 paths, the 10 bhumis, and so on. The essential point is the same here, namely that the goal of all those teachings is to enable practitioners of those teachings to progressively approach enlightenment and in the end attain Buddha, the enlightened state.
Ting ngazo chö shusaya da chö lobjong shesaya changma de rang ge semmen juratang ya gi che tu song de bchre.
So to listen to teachings and to contemplate and study those teachings, the purpose is the same, namely to enable those who do this to make progress on the path to enlightenment, to get to where the process of shifting from a worldly mindset to an otherworldly mindset can happen.
Semte juratang tugre besetina ting tang tugre.
And it's the mind itself, the individual's own mind, that has to do the work and that has to shift to make for these changes. There is nothing else that could possibly bring about this kind of change.
Pernanga lekaji che guna. Lekaji che application ji pyu chena. Tadong lekada top me top tesamre mi ying lakbarwa. Sem jurwa tangye mischigel rari amar.
Now, if you think about applying for a job, you give in your application, you're interviewed and so on, and then you have to wait for the employer's decision whether they have chosen you or someone else for the position. Here you have no influence really beyond your application and what you say during the interview, the job interview. Beyond that, you can't influence the prospective employer's mind in terms of him deciding to take you on as an employee or not. So whether you get the position or not depends upon the judgment of your employer. Here, you're not dependent on anyone else in order to get to the type of shift or change spoken of in brief earlier. It's up to you. You are in fact the only person who can get to this kind of change by way of working with your mind using the Buddha's teaching. So here you're completely free and independent in terms of your future, as it were. Whereas in terms of applying for a job, that's not the case. You cannot decide whether you are going to get the job or not. It's in the hands of other people.
Even Sanjay Komponsengetea, Narang Lapali, free.
And to whether one attains Buddha, the enlightened state or not, it's also up to the individual. The individual who has set his mind on doing so can achieve that independently of all other individuals.
Taking to the Sanjay Song de Zo Langaji Ni Lojongche Donangus Choso the Peggy Nandra Machine Unit Singing Nandra Amjolo Kotsar the Pa Yama Yawachen Rank is something to Chu Kurne Some Nintin Tang Then the Mare Sansum Jinduna Gagin Chwatang Tende Nanda Nimachi Tenden Juatang Tukre.
So in terms of listening to lectures where various Buddhist topics are explained on the part of those who listen, it's a matter of getting the essential point, namely that one just doesn't listen and then sort of forget about it. One doesn't make use of the teachings that have been explained to one. One should apply and use those teachings in order to get to a shift or changes that make for a mindset that has, as it were, turned its back on the world. And therefore, it's necessary, having listened to explanations, to then think about the meaning of the explanations. And if there are questions, doubts, hesitations, one goes back to the teacher and asks the questions one needs to ask in terms of clarifying doubts, hesitations, and the like.
Then Rang simply to Yamlin Nambina. Then when I turn Sanjay Song Rere Layang, Nupashi, which you are, Semden Joatang to be.
So, again, it's a matter of taking up the explanations that one has been given and practice them. It's a matter of practicing, putting into practice, I should say, the explanations that are given to one. And if one goes about the explanations in this way, then it is certain that changes will occur, changes for the better, in terms of one's mindset. And the 37 practices of a Bodhisattva that are explained all have this purpose, namely to bring about changes as to the worldly mindset, constructive changes. So it's a matter of improving the mindset in terms of developing qualities, the qualities that are explained in this and other texts. Tene dangpodi yöntende
sem zongurtongye nipate sem khorang hiye sem singede kain bong.
And secondly, one needs to make efforts whereby mind's true nature is to begin with, understood intellectually, and then as one develops as to this perspective, a more profound understanding results, and the individual continues to make efforts here as well till mind's true nature is known.
Then the sem zongr tong ye ki tabla tangbo sem ngimba namtung ngimba dosha shedong temu tensu wang ma tong tab.
So what is a mindset with good qualities? Well, it's a mindset free of passion, aggression, jealousy and the like, free of thoughts where the driving force is any of the afflictive obscuring states.
Nipate sem zangboche zango sinkete penna.
Thus, a good mindset, as it were, or a mindset of goodness is at hand. One's thoughts, where the driving force is passion, aggression, and the like, have been overcome.
Tate me ta tenzo me sona karcha de ta. Yimping lo sambe lo ni ji lo tenzo jeju budo.
And what are the qualities which can flourish in effect of afflictive, obscuring states no longer being a driving force as to one's mindset? Well, the effect is a mindset concerned with the welfare and well-being of others, a mindset of loving kindness and compassion. Those kind of qualities.
Nipate sem korang ngoshe judu. Tati jatam shibujire gong dongba hobdge tena nge sem nge kanje na ha mo chen rabch. Ngaso namjo namto hakko de ke yarmato sem korang karin ba hakko mendo ha.
Then there is the second perspective, that of the mind itself or the mindset itself and its workings. People new to this perspective may think, well, how odd. Of course I know my own mind. Well, perhaps you just know a single perspective of your mind or your mindset in terms of its many workings, namely the mindset concerned with forming or the part of the mind which works for the sake of interacting with objects out there, object orientation. A process which involves making judgments about what one is in contact with, thoughts of this and that. Now, there are many more workings as to the mindset, but people who are not at all aware of the perspective of there being many more workings, both worldly and otherworldly, may not recognize this or understand this to begin with.
Tende songza ngaranso chö kare koate rang sem getendo. Sur chertu bia nangjuta hajam kecham burega.
So it's very important to incorporate or assimilate, as it were, the knowledge given to one by way of of explaining the Buddha's teachings.
Mato chege ta namto sengkente kandejin tu tueda. Tu some number topat ngoma third to be dictator that he
You see, otherwise you'll continue to be trapped in the dictatorship of the three mental poisons: passion, aggression, and ignorance. And all your thoughts will be tainted by these three mental poisons. And that's sort of all that occurs in the worldly mindset, because the individual is simply too ignorant of the rest of the mindset.
But 남성 안서 코르베 셈들 가는데 되다. 인데 dictator래, 맨데 dictator래. 그 dictator 세운 것도 생각은 참에 랍되기요. The dictator 뭐마테 냥sem난데 돼요.
In terms of the various politics or political systems in various countries of our world, there is a lot of discussions. There are a lot of discussions. Some systems are, from the perspective of the Western world, named dictatorships, and these systems may have other types of criticism for democratic political systems, or the democratic political system. And people in democratic countries tend to think that they are free to make choices in their lives and so on. However, whether living in a so-called dictatorship or in a democracy, the people in both groups as their mindsets are taken over by the dictatorship of the three mental poisons, none of them is really free. It's rather an imaginary thing. You can't be free once you're in the grip of the dictatorship of the three mental poisons.
녀몽 된서 할래비게 ngokor kevatan topchembuchre.
The mental poisons are very clever in terms of exerting their influence. People do not usually even notice that they are in the grip of the dictatorship of the three mental poisons.
In a simple page, you know, Zambulin Din and the Tatinsa, Namshin Jordo, then the Kangamang shoot a tag yorba. Some may take yet the yorba. Dick can't get out cartoon the dirt, Naranso, Decha, said Namto to the
In today's world, everywhere, a lot of people are concerned with climate change. Because the prospects for Mother Earth are not good unless one does something about what causes this kind of climate change. However, of course, one needs to do the changes necessary in order to stop climate change. That's not the point here. The point is that climate change has happened primarily because of one of the three mental poisons, that of desire in the name of development. This is the driving force as to climate change, desire.
Zoraji Javayana, Kolake, Penalochi Zodi, Tajik Zone Yaglan, that cancer, Jalamongo Sotum, Tatum Teleches, got and then Zamin Gatrola Tanktua. A
person who establishes or who starts a manufacturing plant which is coal-powered and who makes a good profit will expand his use of a nearby coal-powered plant, which means that this plant will enlarge and the climate is further affected simply because his mind is profit-driven. That's the only thing he really sees, the owner of the manufacturing plant. And it is his own desire for wealth which is the cause of all of this. So we can see that it's exceedingly important to affect some real change as to one's own mindset. Because the three mental poisons do not affect just the individual who entertains them, but many more sentient beings. So, in terms of the 6 deeds which transcend the ways of the world, the 6 paramitas, we've come to we've come to the third of the 6, which is that of patience. Patience gone to the other shore, and the phrase gone to the other shore indicates the otherworldly nature of patience here. It defines what type of patience one is talking about.
Geve longche debe yasela neje tamche rinchin tertang song deshir kunla shendem pepa ye zebagamba yasela yin singitre.
And the text reads as follows: although Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas accomplish benefit for themselves alone, they strive as though putting out a fire in their hair to make efforts from which are born good qualities which benefit all beings. On the other hand, is the practice of a bodhisattva.
Tati che de perna tange misendi nando gewasa zepa gambate gewarba gewasa bala.
So sorry, it's in the wrong order again. Let me redo this. It is the previous verse, which reads as follows: all that is hurtful is like a jewel treasure to the bodhisattva who wants the pleasures of virtue. Thus, to cultivate patience without anger or resentment toward anyone at all is the practice of a bodhisattva.
Teche de ta zepa gambate gewa nane gewa shuk cheshu chikri gevel lungche sonto gewa se.
So virtue is, this verse says, like a jewel treasure.
This song de pen jase shwale song bare shanti dawak.
The wrong page.
Also? Then jase shwale karsong arsana zepalar pe then getsachi sang ju yamares shedung le dukpe dikpachi yamares.
The well-known Indian Buddhist master Shantideva explained that patience, this kind of otherworldly patience that is to be explained, is the greatest of all virtues, and anger, resentment are the like, are the worst types of non-virtue. So one may wonder what the effects of this kind of virtue may be.
Tella nekap kovarne vichana yang zepa gambala tenne Jawani Jawala, Fladang me Lutopa. Then Lutopa Zandam Mase Lula Nam Nepa Zun Zeba. Then Nindra Chewa Gunju Kurwa. What that in reggae Zepe. You didn't so togre. They Junju Lasopana Zebepian Jay not true by you. What the day song.
In terms of the results of this kind of virtue, one finds 6 specific results listed. In the Bodhisattva Avatar and many other Buddhist scriptures, namely that in effect of this kind of otherworldly virtue, otherworldly virtue, namely patience gone to the other shore, or patience which transcends the ways of the world, in effect of practicing this kind of patience, one will, in all lives where one still takes rebirth in a worldly existence, the rebirth in question will be one in a higher existence. Such as the rebirth of either a human being or a so-called God or divine being. And in that life, the individual will be free from disease, will have an attractive appearance, a good reputation, and will also be respected by others. These and many other good circumstances result from having practiced patience gone to the other shore. These benefits just listed are circumstances desired by all. Everyone wants to have a good appearance, to be free from disease, be respected by all, and the like. So the effects are effects wanted by each and every individual.
Then Tartu Goye Sanji Kompong Rinpoche Sanke Teyang, Zepa Gambal Tene, Top Gogi Aramato.
So these are good circumstances obtained throughout rebirths in worldly existences. Then, in terms of the otherworldly perspective, the effects are to attain Buddha, the enlightened state, as well as prior to that, various levels of enlightenment in terms of the path to the final goal, that of Buddha, the enlightened state. Sanji Kopa Matosuma Sora.
Yes, so Sanji Kompong. That Tagana Shinge, Shangchip Sembeke Lam. Then so Kangayan Zepe Gogiara.
So, in terms of the 10 levels beyond the world, as to the path of a Bodhisattva, these levels are also obtained in dependence upon practice of patience gone to the other shore.
Tenden Kinge Jase Shangchip Samba Tella Songre. Then that Shangchip Samba Tenzo, Pena Doja Jindento, Zoom Zebo Yung Gogiare, Zula Meba Yung Gogiare, Tagana Shinke, Nindra Chambo Yung Gogiare, Tenzo La. Now,
bodhisattvas on these levels do obtain the same good circumstances as the ones listed earlier in the context of rebirths in worldly existences. However, the otherworldly levels of realization, the 10 prior to Buddha, the enlightened state, here the bodhisattvas who have attained these levels of realization, their mindsets are free from attachment to these good circumstances. So in terms of the reactions to good circumstances, such as the ones listed, is very different from the reactions of those still trapped in worldly existences.
Tene Jema Konan Bemute, Sanji Kompong Rierwa. Tash Sanjip Sambatsoge, Sanji Kompong Tobiak Jutayans, the Pachadi.
And again, if we look at the possible result in terms of practicing patience gone to the other shore on those levels, then the deeds, the practice, or the work the Bodhisattva does in terms of making progress as to patience gone to the other world will result in his enlightenment, the attaining of Buddha, the enlightened state.
Tintu Nerji Tamche Rinchin Terdang Song Chevere. Sanchup Samba Tella Zepa Gambetin. Tene, Tilla Sudne Pachi Unkinjian, Sanchup Samba Tella Sorwa Kandeshi Legresana. Me Ulbochi Gnanto Rinpoche Terchi Tobanashi Yungre Song.
So, true practitioners, and in particular, of course, bodhisattvas on any of the 10 otherworldly levels before enlightenment, will see or experience adverse circumstances as a jewel treasure, fully knowing and fully understanding that if patience gone to the other shore becomes the norm in terms of experiencing difficulties, if patience gone to the other shore is the answer to the difficulties, as it were, then the difficulties are comparable to a jewel treasure in that the effects of having responded with patience gone to the other shore is progress, and in the end the attaining of Buddha, the enlightened state, both progress on the path and in the end the attaining of Buddha, the enlightened state, is made possible because of the Bodhisattva having been able to respond with patience gone to the other shore. Therefore, it's the practice of a Bodhisattva to have this response of patience gone to the other shore, and to cultivate this kind of patience in the absence of any anger or resentment towards the individuals who have caused the difficulties encountered. So whatever anyone does to the practitioner, the main point for the practitioner is and should be the response called patience gone to the other shore. So in terms of patience, there are three main types. The first is the kind of patience which doesn't respond with anger or resentment, for example. Thoughts such as, who does this person think he is, or why is this person causing these problems for me, and the like. So that brings us to the second type of patience here, which is that the practitioner accepts what's happening to him. His mind, while his mind is divorced of anger or resentment towards the individual or individuals who caused the problem or problems at hand. So this means that the practitioner has developed to the point where he sees what's happening as an opportunity, a good opportunity. He doesn't reject the difficult circumstance. He doesn't start to blame the others involved. He instead sees the difficulty or difficulties or the obstacle or obstacles as an opportunity. Now, most people who are familiar with the life example of Milarepa may, at the outset of hearing about some of the circumstances of his life, have felt very sorry for him, in that he was very often, during long periods, deprived of proper food, proper clothing, proper housing, and the like. However, Milarepa himself would have taken joy in facing these difficulties, seeing these difficulties as opportunities by way of which one can make progress on the path to enlightenment.
Desa Kumbamendu Aka sen Konzo in Milane Pani Jagamber. Mele Konzo Sore. Chinzo Nanshin Langi and those and young Burji Nangayorish.
Now, at one point, Milarepa happened upon 5 young women in a place called Jänner. And seeing him, the 5 young women felt very sorry for him, and said to him, "Well, poor you. The bad karma you're struck down by is surprising. You do not have proper food, no proper clothes, not even shoes, and no housing." And Milarepa had responded with one of his songs of realization, where he explained how he saw his present circumstances, namely as circumstances of fortune, and explained to them why he felt sorry for them, being trapped in the circumstances they were trapped in.
That in
So, in terms of patience, there is also the perspective of being patient with the hardship or hardships that one may go through for the sake of making progress on the path to enlightenment.
Somebody Chödrak Nepar Sempezeba Songate. Sinan Nuchi Duve Chödrak Moranjin Tonga Yimbatang no tender Gami to Shad Ni Galmi to Toyet Pekapur. Then there
is the third type of patience, in terms of patience gone to the other shore, which concerns one's viewpoint of reality. Here it's about developing insight in terms of what things in fact are, namely essenceless, insubstantial, and unreal. And the fact that even though all things are empty of a real reality, they do manifest continually in terms of, or because of rather, the process of dependent occurrence, to develop knowledge which sees no contradiction between emptiness and manifestation, involves the third type of patience, or acceptance of the nature of reality.
다 대인데 드레게 세파 세켄데 다 장가체나 예와섬라고 샤버레도 던도 네 참마테 랑 셈다 감고래 마도 인체다 병마르바.
Now these three types of patients, gone to the other shore, just listed in brief, are types of patients that each individual practitioner needs to practice himself. No one can do it for him.
쇼핑 몰 동네 뇨주라고 말해. 기긴 기때 온주라고 말해. 나랑 기념는 라래버와.
You can't buy any of these types of patients, nor can your spiritual friend give any of these three types of patients as a gift to you. It's simply not possible. You have to develop these three types of patients yourself.
다 기긴게 가르쳐 버렸으나 디전 로탕데 데레다 생기데 다 기긴게
Your spiritual friend can guide you and explain to you how you develop these kinds of patients, but that's all. In terms of developing them, this is something the practitioner has to do himself.
다 되죠. 랑게 심퓨도 체르네 고아질린 나다. 때들 남킹게 개겐데 가른 첨부인 바 소리 없으세요.
And if one is able to do so, it should also become clear to one that the reason for that one has at all been able to develop any kind of patience is because of the kindness of the spiritual friend who took the time and who made the effort needed for you to develop this kind of patience.
디 깨자데 년에 샘는 주로왔던 마톱나 따디 깨자니 니 시행긴 들려야 라마를 딱 고구마래
티고마 손아
벤 나래 추에도 시에네로와 게 샘들은 주로와지 땅 주나 주로와 땅 퉁킹게 담가던 긴 라마테 대둥에 라마고마 차요 냠네 마셔나 고 라마치 마로 로종치 제버
in terms of the individual who is able to understand this and to experience the truth of what was just explained, there the practitioner will know that the spiritual friend who made it possible for him to develop this kind of patience is his Lama, his Guru. Whereas in terms of others who may have listened to the same teachings, who may have attended the same lectures, but who didn't work with the instructions and the explanations, and who therefore did not develop any of these three kinds of patience, for that person, the lecturer, as it were, is just that, a lecturer. That person won't be a Lama, a Guru, a spiritual guide for that individual, evidently.
라소 다디 예달라 전주기 파신달라 도용세.
Next, we've come to perseverance, gone to the other shore.
다 전주 생겐데 라소 데 런튼 바시 드베 니란양 골라 메쇼 Doctor Zhen Tong Na Drogen Tundu Yuantin June Ji Zhunju Zamba Yase Lalin Yin Songter.
The Tongna Gitsik göra, va? Det Njamlempa ende chik tongna koran så dende tog gendus rang döntu.
Ja.
Tene ngarang dela yatse chik chegore trenchene tene dropun döntu yönten jungnegi söndru la sopa som göra, va?
Ja,
Tongna git sikte, va? Gjorde det nangla det. Nej, tetse. Nej, man koju salama.
Kanske. Okay. No, that is a cantar perna tandelanierang la pe yari matorwa.
Men det sikket råtang.
Ta migetona sigarwa.
Den gick togna.
Ja, den det tona. Ben ne pe shaga chona. De koyer. Okay.
Tene?
Penna slag kompung thobe yin singe hindu tenzo kale kase yek. Ting anso ngasum to thong do.
Yes.
O thona se de tinde daw chila kok sege yorwa.
Me det där koket.
Tin?
Tongnagi penna den det gick togna. Ngonsum to tong kogore tam ende yore sam som det gick i michi.
Mar ngonsum to thona al gjorna taps det.
So if a practitioner of the path of a Bodhisattva happens upon a Shravaka or a Pratyeka Buddha practitioner who accomplish benefit for themselves alone by way of great effort comparable to the effort someone whose hair is on fire would make in order to put out that fire. Having seen this, the practicing bodhisattva, decides to make efforts which are born or which rather generate qualities which benefit all beings. This is the practice of a bodhisattva.
That is on de that rani ki korve dungal thune tarba thundu nyer ve nintö tang ran san ye yinandra then jekten bag la ye kompung dunken so yinandra 랑게 yin zinsan rabote ngenyong ji samba bashi gone dunkin namji penangola meshona te dopana shi tene zunju zambu doga songaja.
Now, point made here is that there are various spiritual paths where the motivation for practicing in terms of the practitioners of these various paths is that of attaining the goal themselves. There isn't that much concern with all other individuals and showing the same path to them. So the focus is on the individual alone, the practitioner alone, more or less. You have spiritual approaches, where the goal is to obtain a higher rebirth in a so-called God realm for the practitioner himself. And you have the path in Buddhism, or the paths in Buddhism, of both Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, where the main focus is that of obtaining the goal for the practitioner himself. That doesn't necessarily exclude loving kindness and compassion towards others. However, the primary concern is obtaining the goal oneself. Now, these individuals, in terms of the extent of the efforts they put into obtaining the goal, here the extent of their efforts is very great, comparable to the efforts someone whose hair is on fire would make in order to put out the fire.
Chazan, tenzu yang zundu tenre tsam gogu yona, ta ngarang ke ndroa simjin tamche jitan drubu yinsen shongchup tu tamche yore la.
Whereas a practitioner of the path of a Bodhisattva has, at the outset of his path, pledged to make his primary concern that of the welfare of others, namely to guide all sentient beings to the goal.
Dan drubji te drube che to nge san yending kunjin jong ne sanje ji kong tubar che gi yin se tam che be shongchup sempe zundu go da ma go she be go re song.
As the primary focus in terms of the path of a Bodhisattva is all-encompassing in terms of including all sentient beings, then one can draw the conclusion here that there is no need to mention that the efforts of practicing Bodhisattva has to do in order to achieve his goal would be far more extensive than the efforts made by practitioners of the previous paths. So, diligence gone to the other shore, or perseverance gone to the other shore, in the context of the path of a Bodhisattva, would mean that the practitioner divorces himself of laziness. Laziness is simply given up in order to achieve the great goal of this path.
Laziness sengenda kandej chade yorsana nangseke ta jiglubam dorna train lander mendu sani lander mendu some shisho chanja che devatala laziness jigre.
And in terms of laziness that is to be given up, you have different types. You have the first of the three types listed in this category, which is the kind of laziness where the individual postpones doing what he could have done today in terms of practice and in terms of working with his mindset as to making progress towards enlightenment, thinking, oh, I'll start tomorrow, for example.
Then you
have the second type of laziness, which is being distracted by non-virtue, by meaningless actions and the like. So you're preoccupied with doing that which makes for no progress. you give up practicing the path, and instead you do this and that, whatever that may be.
Penna Twencha Song King, that cancer, Cedric Pattern or some of the Nam in Twencha so here some tangle.
If one takes an extreme example of this type of laziness, laziness here, as it is a very extreme example in the context of non-virtue, think of a scientist who works day and night on the invention of weaponry, for example, used by members of armies throughout the world. This is laziness in the shape and form of non-virtuous actions that have a great negative impact on the lives of many. So the process of developing weaponry involves starts out with the thought, how do I most effectively take the lives of a large number of individuals as to the enemy army, as it were. And so until the weaponry has been invented, this is what preoccupies the mind of the scientist or the inventor. This is an example, just. All in all, most worldly situations and actions are of this type, or originate with this type of laziness, namely the preference is to be distracted by non-virtue in its various shapes and forms. Yeah. Then we have the third type of laziness, which is sort of it sort of involves a lack of self-confidence. The self-confidence which makes an individual capable of doing things here, engaging in the efforts by way of which enlightenment can be achieved, thinking of himself as the kind of person who isn't really able to do something like that. There are many people like who have this mindset or this view of themselves. Now, in terms of any individual, the fact is that any person, any sentient being can attain Buddha, the enlightened state, by virtue of the so-called Buddha within, the fact of the presence of mind's true nature within each and every sentient being. Now, in particular, a person or a sentient being having obtained a so-called free and well-favored human rebirth, where the intellect has the capacity to make for a change, to make for progress on the path to enlightenment, where the individual can walk and talk by himself, as it were. He is free to choose his course of action, as it were. Here, there is no reason at all for this sort of lack of self-confidence, as it were. That lack of self-confidence is simply not appropriate, because as an individual who has encountered the Buddhist path and who has the circumstances, the conditions needed to practice that path, there should be no thoughts such as, I'm not able to do this. There shouldn't be doubts as to being able to attain Buddha, the enlightened state, simply because of the presence of the Buddha nature, the Buddha within. One can learn this from the many examples of practitioners of old, good men and women, who set out to attain enlightenment and who actually did attain enlightenment.
Penna Jinresikir to top. Ta ujin jeb semo gelon mapam gehong ma dawe shuken teke then
dawe shunga
dawe second up on the
laso
kong zepon sha nika che son wa shap che son
cha sena lakpa kya
ini che son wa ini che son
shab kang parang ko
okay che ne tenjege kangal chi thebare te kongjin resi drubne tama
kangi ujingi gyalko
ujin gyalwo indabut tamise indabutik semo yisegindo indabut mongbo shongare tende jema shongwe indabut chiresha.
Now there is the life example of a woman of the past who was born as the daughter to the last king Indrabhuti of the land of Udayana. Now she fell ill with leprosy and lost, because of the disease, both her hands and both her feet.
Yin yang kong jinres drumne deshin bo yoba hakon jinres chik drumne jema shalngon sum dusik
her name was Youthful Moonlight, and in spite of her very difficult circumstances, she set out to do the meditation on the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara Chenresi, she having found out about the presence of the Buddha within, that inspiring her to enter the path. And she did attain, in consequence of her efforts, enlightenment in that life, and became known as Kilongma Palmo, having taken ordination as a Buddhist nun. And she is the founder of the practice in Tibetan named Nyungne, which is very often done in many Tibetan Buddhist centers.
Laso, that then one, turn to Crown College, Yorasana, Tongbot Kujur Tundu Chevre. 산제지 송단 된절 규배 고네 주었달라 규배 jorubsundus.
So how many types of perseverance are there, one may ask? Well, to begin with, the first type of perseverance is the one which has to do with the fact that the practitioner, having understood the sacredness of the teachings, has respect and devotion for the teachings, which inspires him to persevere on the path.
니빠테 딱저르 준주 송다. 준주의 발음이 제바.
The second type of perseverance is continuous or simply permanent perseverance. The perseverance is constant. There aren't what we call interruptions.
테네 somebody 촉 미십 준주 송다. 단직 송성이야.
Third type of perseverance is the one where the practitioner never stops, simply because he's never satisfied with what he has achieved for himself or for others. There is always something more in the mind of this person to be achieved.
대인들 단 노르츠 뒤나 전주 생계대로 유르여나 직된단 직된는데 배연된 상마양 전주기 제수로 오세요.
Now, this type of perseverance gone to the other shore, will result in the developing of both worldly and otherworldly qualities.
라소 드린 대샤비 대체 넘버솔라 저완라분도 나갈 농로는.
So that's all for today. If you have questions, please email them to Karma Sampling, and there will be a question and answer session.
당역계자대 미신직 유네 시에 대두 제 넘버서 고기 여당 내 대시다 학고금인도 대인도 저완 능주대 백개 참부래.
Khenpo Rinpoche thinks it's important that you ask questions that you may have, because for him it's very difficult otherwise to know if all of you who listen have properly understood the explanations or not.
남준 조선한 시에도 다치 고태 마디 쇼쇼지 학고도 될 때는 저시 양자 옙도.
During teachings where people are physically present, it's more easy to find out whether people understood or not, and then explain and give further explanations if needed and clarifications if needed.
되네 곰하고 더 함하고 나 등에 개개인 고티 처비.
Khenpo Rinpoche says that unless he knows whether you've understood or not, if that isn't clear to him, he feels as if his role of a proper teacher isn't fulfilled. So he feels a bit guilty from time to time, not being able to determine whether those of you who listen have understood or not.
Lasso Sunam Daya Tamje Zegani Tomne Yebel Danam Pamjet Jegana Je Balap Truba Yes Sigbe Solen Rowa Rowa Rishu